It was a cold, relentless winter in the small town of Frostbrook. Snow covered the ground like a white shroud, muffling the sounds of the city. The wind howled through the streets, carrying with it an eerie silence that clung to every corner. Frostbrook had always been a quiet town, but tonight, something darker lingered in the air. The night was darker than usual, the moon hidden behind thick clouds, casting the city in an unsettling gloom. The residents of Frostbrook had grown accustomed to the long, harsh winters, but this one felt different. It wasn't just the biting cold or the endless snowfall, it was the fear that had gripped the town since the murders began. 18 people had been found dead over the past 2 months, their bodies mutilated beyond recognition. The police were baffled, and the townsfolk were terrified. The murderer had no pattern, no motive, just a thirst for blood. Each victim was chosen at random, leaving the residents of Frostbrook to wonder who would be next. Lena was a quiet girl, living alone in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. She had moved to Frostbrook a year ago, seeking solace from the chaos of her previous life. The town's tranquility had appealed to her, offering an escape from the noise and confusion of the outside world. But now that tranquility had turned into something sinister. Lena was no stranger to the stories of the murders. She had heard the whispers, seen the fear in the eyes of her neighbors, but she had always felt safe in her little apartment, nestled away from the rest of the world. That was until tonight. It was just past midnight when Lena first noticed something was wrong. She had been curled up on her couch, a blanket wrapped tightly around her, watching the snow fall outside her window. The streets were empty, the city asleep under the blanket of night. But as she stared into the darkness, she noticed someone moving through the snow. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, a trick of the light. But as the figure drew closer, she realized it was a man. He was tall, his face obscured by a thick hood, his movements slow and deliberate. Lena's heart began to race as she watched him, an uneasy feeling settling in the pit of her stomach. The man stopped in front of her building, his head tilted upwards as if he could see her through the window. Lena froze, her breath catching in her throat. She felt an overwhelming urge to turn off the lights, to hide from his gaze, but she couldn't move. She was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. The man outside was no ordinary passerby. He was the one the town feared, the one who had brought death to Frostbrook. He had no name, no identity. He was simply known as the Madman. His mind was a twisted labyrinth of dark thoughts and violent urges, a place where sanity had long since lost its way. The Madman had been watching Lena for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He had seen her walking through the snow-covered streets, her breath visible in the cold air. He had followed her from a distance, learning her routine, her habits, and now he was ready to make her his next victim. Lena's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the madman slowly make his way towards the entrance of her building. She knew she had to act quickly. Grabbing her phone, she dialed the police, her fingers trembling as she punched in the numbers. 911. What's your emergency? The operator's voice crackled through the phone. There's a man outside my building, Lena whispered, her voice barely audible. I think he's the one who's been killing people. The operator's tone shifted, becoming more urgent. Stay on the line with me, ma'am. Where are you located? Lena gave her address, her eyes never leaving the madman as he disappeared into the building. She could hear his footsteps echoing through the stairwell, getting closer with each passing second. You need to leave the apartment now, the operator instructed. Do you have a back door or fire escape? Lena nodded, though the operator couldn't see her. There's a fire escape in the bedroom. Go there now, but stay on the line. Lena moved as quickly as she could, her body trembling with fear. She could hear the madman's footsteps growing louder, closer. Reaching the bedroom, she threw open the window and climbed onto the fire escape, the cold air biting at her skin. She could see the lights of the police cars in the distance, but they seemed so far away. The madman was already on her floor. She could hear him in the hallway, his breath heavy and uneven. Lena climbed down the fire escape as fast as she could, her hands numb from the cold. She could hear the madman behind her, his footsteps on the metal rungs, each step sending a jolt of terror through her. She reached the ground and started running, her feet slipping on the icy pavement. The snow fell harder now, a blinding flurry that made it difficult to see. Lena's breath came in ragged gasps as she pushed herself to keep moving, her heart pounding in her ears. The madman was close behind, his dark silhouette barely visible through the snow. He moved with a terrifying purpose. His eyes locked on Lena as she ran for her life. Lena turned a corner, her legs burning with the effort. She could see the lights of the police cars getting closer, the sound of sirens filling the air. But the madman was relentless, his pace never faltering. She stumbled, her foot catching on a patch of ice, and fell to the ground. The snow cushioned her fall, but the impact knocked the wind out of her. She tried to get up, but the madman was already there, standing over her with a twisted smile on his face. He reached down, his hand closing around her arm, pulling her to her feet. Lena struggled, but his grip was like iron, unyielding. Please, she begged, tears streaming down her face. Don't kill me. The madman's smile widened, his eyes gleaming with madness. I've been waiting for you, Lena, he whispered, his voice a low, menacing growl. You're special. You're the one I've been looking for. Lena's blood ran cold. How did he know her name? What did he want from her? But before she could process what was happening, the sound of approaching sirens grew louder, and the madman's expression changed. He tightened his grip on Lena's arm, dragging her towards a nearby alleyway. No one can save you now, he hissed. But as they reached the alley, a police car skidded to a halt, blocking their path. The madman let out a snarl of frustration, his eyes darting around for another way out. But there was none. Let her go, a voice shouted, and Lena looked up to see a police officer stepping out of the car. His gun drawn, the madman hesitated, his grip on Lena's arm tightening for a moment before he shoved her to the ground. She landed in the snow, gasping for breath. As the officer moved towards the madman, his gun trained on him. "You're surrounded," the officer said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "There's nowhere to go." The madman's eyes flicked to Lena, a twisted smile playing on his lips. "This isn't over," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the wind. Then, in one swift movement, he turned and bolted down the alleyway, disappearing into the darkness. The officer cursed under his breath and ran after him, but Lena knew it was too late. The madman was gone. Lena sat in the snow, her body shaking with fear and exhaustion. The other officers arrived moments later, helping her to her feet and wrapping her in a blanket. She could barely speak, her mind still reeling from the terror of what had just happened. The officers escorted her to the safety of their car, and as they drove her to the police station, Lena stared out the window at the snow-covered streets, untouched by the horrors of the night. But Lena knew better. The city looked peaceful. She knew that the madman was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for his next victim. And she knew that, no matter where she went, she would never feel truly safe again. As the car pulled into the station, Lena glanced at her reflection in the window. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. The events of the night had left their mark on her, a scar that would never fully heal, but she was alive. She had survived the dark night. For now. The madman stood at the edge of the city, his breath visible in the cold night air. He watched as the police cars sped through the streets, their lights flashing in the distance. He had escaped, but his mind was already planning the next move. He knew where Lena lived. He knew her routine, her habits. She had slipped through his fingers tonight, but he was patient. He could wait. The snow continued to fall, covering the city in a thick, white blanket. The night was dark, but for the madman, it was just the beginning. The end was far from over.